All right. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. I'm very glad to present some of my thoughts in front of you. Um, my talk today is about different explanations in grapholinguistics that I think don't actually compete but complement each other. And I'm going to show you what I mean in the next 20 or so minutes. So let's look at this. I don't know if we can maybe, can I minimize this? Yeah. Okay. No, I actually can't. It's a bit better. All right, so picture this. We're at a conference about writing as we are now, and two people are talking in a coffee break or whatever about writing, and one of them says, well, at its core, writing is how written marks map onto language, not only sounds, but linguistic structures in general. The other person, maybe a sociolinguist, says, well, writing at its core, it's actually a social practice. It is about identity, power, about who gets to decide what's correct, who gets to correct, for example. And I would say here, there is actually no disagreement present. But these two people are asking different questions. I have to say this talk is not going to be about writing per se. It's about the field that studies writing, so about grapholinguistics. It's a bit programmatic because why not? And it's about how findings within the field travel and what happens when findings travel. And how it happens that sometimes we talk past each other and what we can do in order to limit this talking past each other. And I will draw a grid in the next 20 minutes. And for this grid, this conference is the best data set. We were told we have 66 talks here, and each of those talks will fit into this grid somehow. So a lot of this, I have to say, is based on my 2020 book. But of course, I have developed the ideas further since. And some of the terminology has become used, such as like sociocultural fit, as you will see. And I'm happy about this, but I've actually never presented this framework at a conference ever. So I wanted to do this for once. And at a conference with grapholinguistics in its name, no less. I think this is the best venue to do so. And I want to say at the start also, this is not a criticism of anyone, so it shouldn't be read like this. It is an invitation, as you will see. So let's look at some of the things that the study of writing has produced in the last couple of decades from different perspectives in different fields. So this is not grapholinguistics per se. These are different findings from different disciplines. And it's quite extraordinary, the breadth and the depth of research that we have. It could be the sign of a mature field, but it's not quite integrated yet, I would argue. And this richness also has a side effect, and that's what I want to argue today, because sometimes findings get a life of their own. They get cited, they get re-cited, and statements that are about a specific facet of writing become statements about writing as a whole and become generalized, and partial insights become general insights. And that can also be detrimental, I think. That is often not carelessness on the author's behalf, but it happens in uptake, how something is received. And there is a cognitive reason for that. And one kind of explaining this is the concept of omission neglect, so that we cannot think about what isn't there. We see what is there and we work with what is there, but we don't see the blank spaces or the blind spots. That's why they are called blind spots. There's also in research this concept of what you see is all there is. And that's also what I'm going to work with, trying to make visible what we don't see in the first moment when we conduct our own research. So today is about identifying both how some questions that are actually specific become generalized, and also about how other questions remain in the dark. And I want to develop this grid in front of you. It's going to be our working tool. And here we can ask two questions on these two axes. And the first is, what are we actually describing? And I distinguish, and some other people are distinguishing between three levels of writing and three that often interact, but that you can keep apart. The first of which is graphetics, by analogy with phonetics, the materiality of writing. So writing has a physical form. Scripts have a physical form. We all know this. There are surfaces and tools that we work with to write, to inscribe, and this has a major effect, of course, on our writing systems. Then we have graphematics, what I call the linguisticality, even if that is not a word, maybe, where the graphic is related to language. So where a writing system becomes a system related to a specific language. So where graphic marks are related to sounds, for example, or morphemes or other linguistic structures. And then we have orthography, which is the normativity. It is about convention, codification, whereas graphematics is about what is possible in a writing system and what is actually done also and practiced by users, because users don't always obey orthographic rules. Orthography is about what is actually correct, and that's a social fact mostly. What is sanctioned as officially correct. But of course, many writing systems also don't really have that. And so with description, with this axis, we get our first, it sounds negative, but failure mode, which I would call descriptive under differentiation, which is when we talk about one thing and over generalize, when rows here in this grid collapse. So for example, when material form gets treated as linguistic structures, which can happen, for example, with spacing, word spacing, which is different across different writing systems. Some writing systems don't have word spacing. They have spacing between phrases or no spacing at all, and other types of strategies to delimit material. But another example that I have given a lot of times is the use of orthography, the term orthography, and also by extension, the concept in the Anglo-American realm, which is often used very descriptively in the sense of writing system. And this kind of then casts out all the normativity. It makes it a blind spot, because when we use orthography descriptively, then what are we calling the normativity? And here is one way where talking past each other can start and can happen. Now, the second axis is what kind of question we are asking. And why is this facet of writing, be it the materiality or the normativity, for example, the way it is? So this is explanation. And here we have four so-called fits, an evaluative term. How coherent is a writing system as a system? That's a systematic fit. So for example, for scripts, you can ask, are there any systematic gaps, any shapes that could be used but aren't used? And then could be used, for example, when a new letter is needed in the writing system down the road. But also, are the graphemes consistent, for example? Are there any gaps? An outlier in a script would, for example, in Roman script be uppercase J, which when it comes to direction is an outlier. So questions like that go into the systematic fit. They are the most marginalized because we seldom look at writing systems completely independently. Then we have the linguistic fit, which is one of the more prominent ones. How well does a writing system map onto its specific language, onto the structures of that language, the needs of that language, so to speak, and not only phonology. So this shouldn't be phonocentric, but all structures of that language. And here we have things like transparency, which is a buzzword in grapholinguistics. Then we have the processing fit. And this asks how well a writing system fits our human capacities, both physical and cognitive, that we have, because we of course, use writing systems, and we only have our physical and cognitive endowment to do so. And then we have the sociocultural fit, last but certainly not least, which is how well a writing system serves a community. Its identity, its culture, its values, the practices that are practiced there, also available technology there, because that also differs vastly, institutions. So it's a relatively broad fit, but ordinary users mostly meet literacy in that column. And the hinge of my talk is that these fits do not compete with each other. They complement each other. And findings in one of those columns and in another one, they don't actually contradict each other. So this is the grid filled out. You don't need to read all of the text. It's a lot, but it's meant as a cognitive tool. It's not revolutionary. I like to just make order out of things. That's just my personal preference. These are example questions from a handbook I'm currently editing from the chapters. Like, for example, we can look in the graphetic and systematic cell. We can ask how regular shapes are, for example, in runes, if there are any gaps, if anything doesn't fit the system graphetically. Our favorite is the graphematic and linguistic fit cell, where we ask how transparent grapheme phoneme mappings are. A graphetic processing question would be how different scripts influence handwriting acquisition, which is also a fascinating question. And a sociocultural and orthographic question is an important one. How do ideologies shape decision-making when it comes to written standards and orthographies? When we forget that findings sit in one cell or a few cells at the most, I would say, they tend to get overgeneralized. And that's what I would call explanatory overreach. That inflates what the evidence says for one of the cells. And some of you may think these fits are just linguistics in miniature. The sociocultural fit is sociolinguistics, the processing fit is psycholinguistics, and I have said as much myself that writing is like language only in a microcosm. However, linguistics has had a century time now to sort these questions, to delimit them, also then again to engage in interdisciplinarity. But yeah, there was more time to do that. And in grapholinguistics, or the study of writing, this hasn't been done to that extent, I would argue. So, for example, a typological label like alphabet or abjad, which sits in this green cell, does not immediately tell us something about cognition, about how a writing system is processed. But those two things are very often conflated. And I'm going to give you some examples now. Most of you will know the orthographic depth hypothesis. It's a very influential hypothesis that says that the systematicity and the regularity in grapheme phoneme mapping makes predictions about how difficult a writing system is to acquire for children. So for reading acquisition. And deep orthographies like English or Danish, for example, are harder to acquire than more transparent ones like Italian or Finnish, for example. And this very valid finding has wandered tremendously and often without support. This year, in a paper by Schmalz et al., they actually found and operationalized orthographic depth and found that it's actually two concepts, not one concept. So it encompasses unit size, how large written units are that map onto phonology. One could also call this complexity, and the systematicity of the mapping. So how predictable mapping is once you know the units of the system. So from the beginning, orthographic depth was actually more than this one cell processing fit and graphematics. But it also wondered, as you see here in this blue, we have a lot of blue in the grid now. In 2003, there was a study that compared different European writing systems, orthographies, and found that children learn to read in English twice as slow as in some other writing systems because of orthographic depth and syllabic complexity. And that statement has traveled. It has traveled into cross-national comparison of educational policy. It has turned into ideologies like English is broken and English literacy instruction must compensate for that, when that is not actually what the original finding was saying. And that is an ideological and instructional conclusion that would fit better in this sociocultural column. Also interesting, after grade 3, this dissolves, and it's not about orthographic depth anymore. It's a lot more about socioeconomic factors. And then we are squarely in the sociocultural fit. Another example, to go to the other column now, is the new literacy studies. Very influential approach. Literacy not seen as a neutral cognitive skill, but as a social practice embedded in specific cultural, social, political contexts, and has a lot to do with ideology and power hierarchies. And it says that correct and appropriate are actually social judgments. They are not, in the first instance, in the system, but they are social judgments. And it is a sociocultural orthographic question at its heart. But here also overreach happened when it was received and taken up by people. The fact that norms are very often social facts sometimes also bled into graphematics, for example. But graphematics is not merely ideology. It's not social facts. It's here we have the architecture of writing systems. We have structures we can describe. And also debates about spelling norms. Yes, they are very social, of course, but and ideologically loaded. But of course, there are also linguistic arguments in debates around spelling reform. And the architecture of writing systems plays a central role there as well, not only ideology and social facts. One last example is writing system typology. That's the one closest to myself and where I work mostly. And here we have almost been obsessed with this one facet, which Terry Joyce and I called dominant level of representational mapping. So which kind of linguistic unit, grapheme or written unit, relates to mostly, whether that be a phoneme, morpheme, syllable. And it's a prolific field. A lot is being published in this. But look at one of the favorite examples in writing system typology, which is Korean Hangul, which is actually a lot of things. So if you look at this, we have multiple level of organizations. So this is it a basic character of Hangul? We have a syllable block. So this is a segmental unit in Korean, but it actually is complex. It is made up of smaller segments that are syllabically arranged, the letters. So you could say it is uncontestedly an alphabet, but you also have then this featurality, so this iconic nature of the shapes. So typologically, what is it? Well, those are different questions and they answer to different things. So you won't get a satisfactory answer unless you say what you're actually looking for and what you want to define. And I also added here in the sociocultural fit column that linguists are infatuated with this featural thing, and it has become overblown. So that also plays a role, like how it is dealt with in research. In general, you get a much fuller picture of any phenomenon in writing if you look to fill out all of the cells. Of course, no single person can do that for any phenomenon or research object, but that's what I want to get at in my conclusion. No need to read all of this. I will also share the slides if you want. But yes, this is about Korean Hangul, and you can ask many questions that concern all levels of writing and all of these fits. And before I conclude, briefly, one last example from writing system typology. There was a debate around 10 years ago between J. Marshall Unger and Zev Handel, and they argued about the term logographic and whether Chinese is logographic or not, whether this term concept has any merit. And I argued in a paper that I called Grapholinguistic Wars, a bit dramatic, yeah, but there are a couple of those, that they actually talked past each other a lot of the time, and that they were talking about two different things, and that it is one question to ask whether Chinese is logographic, whether the writing system works this way, and how it is processed. Those are two different questions. And yes, you could use one of them to support the other, but you would have to identify it as such and not claim this is a directly typological claim, for example. And just because we have keynotes here as well, I wanted to try to place them somewhere in the grid. And you could do this with all the talks. And the beautiful thing is, I think, is that the grid would be full. So we would have talks in every cell. I don't really want to come off as someone who needs to label everything and categorize everything. That might come off like that. But this is just a tool to organize and to help. It doesn't mean to limit anyone to any given cell, but just to make someone aware of where you stand and where some possible blind spots may be, but not as a defect, but as potential. Yeah, that's basically what I want to say. You can make visible your blind spots, and I'm glad that I'm at the beginning of the conference because I can say this now. We have 3 days now where we have a lot of coffee breaks, and you can talk to each other, and you can find other people who are working in other cells, and you can collaborate with each other, which is, I think, the greatest and most fruitful generator of knowledge. Sandra Mitchell has called this integrative pluralism. So yes, we shouldn't stay confined to one cell, but we should know that given evidence supports only given questions and gives only certain answers, and we shouldn't overgeneralize. We should be cautious about that. So we should take these partial explanations and integrate them into a bigger explanations. That's all basically I'm advocating for. So yes, this is my last slide. We sit in different cells of this grid. But I think the beautiful thing about grapholinguistics, also why I like this term, why I like this conference, is that we all make up this field, which is very much still in the making. And since my own contract is going to be expiring before the next iteration, and I really don't have an idea whether I'm going to be back here ever again, I want to say this as the last thing. Maybe I will say here ever. So my legacy is be aware of where you are in this grid, but then break free. And because writing deserves to be studied from all of these perspectives at the same time. So thank you for your attention.
Just wanted to officially say that you don't need to worry about that. We will make whatever it needed to get you back to the linguistic. So Dimitrios is a bit penalized because of the technical difficulties we had at the beginning. His talk was a bit short, and so we have time for only one question. Who wants to ask that question? Yes.
Thank you for the great talk. I enjoyed it. Although I found it a little bit utilitarian in terms of how to analyze language.
Yeah.
You use the word holistic.
Yeah.
I wonder if I could use the word holy in terms of sacred texts and the different ways that sacred texts are often intended to be read in multiple different ways. In
Yeah.
terms of phonemes turning into actual symbolic semantics.
Yeah.
And alphabets being customized in terms of position of the alphabet, leading to new meanings of those texts. Would you throw all that into social cultural column? Is there
I'd have to think about it. No, not all of it. I think it would be split up, I think, again. It would be more than one question. But it's tempting to say, yeah, because it's primarily about this one thing. It's just in this column. That's not what I wanted to say. But very interesting thought. Yeah, thank you. I need to think about it more. Yeah.
So thank you, Dimitrios, very much.
Thank you.
Sorry.